If you have ever stood at the edge of something vast, an ocean, a night sky full of stars, a silence so deep it seemed to have weight, you may have felt, even briefly, that the world was telling you something. That behind everything visible there was something older, something that had no beginning you could point to and no end you could imagine. Today, we are going to explore one such presence. This is not a god of thunder or war, not a being who walked among mortals and left footprints in the soil. We are going to explore a being who predated the world itself, who existed before the stars, before the void, before even the concept of time had anything to measure. His name was Eru Ilúvatar. He was the supreme being of John Ronald Reuel Tolkien's Legendarium, the mythology Tolkien spent his entire adult life constructing and refining. And while Tolkien is known to most of the world as the author of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, those stories were only a small corner of a vast mythological universe that began and was rooted in this one figure. Before we go any further, welcome. It's so good to have you here. If this is your first time visiting the channel, you'll find explorations of mythology, legend, folklore, and the great stories of imagined worlds, told with the depth, respect, and care they deserve. If that sounds like something you'd enjoy, please consider subscribing and following the channel. Your support helps make these videos possible and ensures you never miss a future episode, with many more already in the works. Now, let us begin. The mythology of Tolkien's Legendarium was recorded primarily in a volume called The Silmarillion, published in 1977, 3 years after Tolkien's death, and edited by his son, Christopher Tolkien, from a vast body of manuscripts, notes, and drafts that Tolkien had worked on since the early 20th century. It was, in essence, the foundational mythology from which everything else in Tolkien's world grew. At the very beginning of the Silmarillion, in the opening text known as the Ainulindalë, the music of the Ainur, the following words appeared. There was Eru, the One, who in Arda is called Ilúvatar. The name Eru came from the ancient Elvish language of Quenya, one of the constructed languages Tolkien developed as part of his mythology. It meant simply the One, or more literally, he that is alone. The second name, Ilúvatar, was also Quenya and translated as Father of All. Together, these names described a being who was singular in the most absolute sense. There was no other like him. There had never been another like him. He had no origin, no parentage, no birth, and no history before he simply was. He was the uncreated creator, the being who existed not because anything made him, but because existence itself required him to be its source. Eru had no physical form that any being could describe or comprehend. He existed beyond the physical world, beyond what Tolkien called the circles of the world, in a transcendence that even the greatest of his created beings could not fully fathom. He had no spouse, no companion equal to himself existed, for there was nothing and no one else before he chose to create. He was not lonely, in any sense the mythology suggested. He was complete, self-sufficient, and the beginning of all things. The mythology gave no suggestion that he could die or be ended. He was the source of existence itself, and the source could not be unmade by anything that derived from it. The first act of Eru Ilúvatar that the mythology recorded was not the creation of the physical world. It was the creation of minds. Before Arda, the name for the world as it would come to exist, before the void itself had been filled with anything, Eru made the Ainur. The Ainulindalë recorded it plainly. He made first the Ainur, the holy ones, that were the offspring of his thought. The Ainur were spiritual beings of enormous power and beauty. They were not made from any external material. They were, as the text stated, the offspring of Eru's thought, expressions of aspects of Eru's own nature given form and will and individual awareness. One Ainu might embody a deep love of craftsmanship. Another might express a care for living things. Another might be drawn to knowledge, or to the sea, or to the movements of the stars. Because each Ainu was made from a different aspect of Eru's thought, each was different from all others, and none knew the full mind of Eru. Each understood only those parts of him that had been expressed within themselves. This was the deliberate design of their creation. The Ainur were not all equal in power. Among them, those of greatest might and understanding would eventually be called the Valar, the powers of the world. Those of lesser degree, who served the Valar and carried out their designs, came to be called the Maiar. Both the Valar and the Maiar will be explored in their own dedicated episodes on this channel. What mattered here was the fact of their creation. Eru had filled the void with thought made into being, and those beings were his first and closest children, the means through which the next and far greater act of creation would unfold. After the making of the Ainur, Eru spoke to them and proposed something remarkable. He invited them to make music together. This was not a casual invitation. It was the act through which the world itself would be called into being. Eru laid before the Ainur a great theme and invited them to give voice to it, to sing, each according to their own understanding and nature, and to weave those individual voices into a single vast harmony. The Ainulindalë described what followed as music of such immeasurable beauty that it passed beyond hearing into sight. As the Ainur sang, the music was not simply sound. It unfolded as a vision. The voices of the Ainur produced melodies within melodies, themes within themes, each building upon what had come before, until the entire void was filled with music so complex and so beautiful that it became the blueprint for all that would ever exist. Eru proposed 3 distinct great themes in total. In each, he introduced a new musical idea and invited the Ainur to develop it. This was the method of creation in Tolkien's mythology. Not a sudden act of command spoken once, but an elaboration. A music made in collaboration between Eru and the beings he had brought into existence. The music was not merely beautiful. It was, as the mythology made clear, a record of everything that would ever happen in the world. Every life, every age, every war, every grief, every joy, all of it was present in the music before a single thing had been given physical form. This was the nature of Eru's foreknowledge. He knew the music in its entirety because it was, in the deepest sense, his own thought made audible. The great music was not untroubled. Among the Ainur, one stood apart from all others in the breadth of his gifts. He had been granted more of the powers and understanding of Eru than any of his kin. His name was Melkor, and he would eventually become the first and greatest of all the forces of darkness in the mythology. But in the beginning, he was simply the mightiest of the Ainur, and the most restless. Melkor had long desired a power that was not given to any of the Ainur, the Flame Imperishable. This was the secret creative fire of Eru, the fundamental force through which true and independent life could be granted to any being or thing. Melkor had searched for it in the void, seeking it in the darkness between what existed, wishing to use it in creations of his own, but he could not find it. The Ainulindalë recorded simply that the Flame Imperishable was with Ilúvatar. It was not a thing separate from Eru that could be located and taken. It was, in a deep sense, an expression of Eru's own nature, inseparable from the one himself. Unable to find this power and unwilling to accept the limits of his station, Melkor began to introduce elements into the great music that were not part of the theme Eru had proposed. The Ainulindalë described it. He began to interweave matters of his own imagining that were not in accord with the theme of Ilúvatar. The discord spread. Like a dissonant chord introduced into a harmony, it drew those Ainur who sang near Melkor away from the original theme and into his music. Some swept along by the sheer power of his voice, others drawn by the attraction of his ideas. The harmony that had been building broke apart, and what emerged was a storm. 2 musics in conflict, Melkor's discordant countermelody raging against the theme of Eru. Eru's response was deliberate and extraordinary. He did not silence Melkor. He did not destroy the discord or forbid it from existing. Instead, he rose from his seat and proposed a second great theme, alike to the first, but stronger. When Melkor's discord rose to challenge even that, Eru answered with a third theme, quieter, different in character from anything that had come before, but possessing at its heart a quality that could not be overcome. a deep sorrow that was also somehow triumphant. Eventually, Eru raised both his hands and the music ceased entirely. Into the silence that followed, Eru spoke to Melkor. He told him, and through him all the Ainur, that no theme, however powerful or rebellious, could be introduced that did not ultimately have its source in Eru himself. He said to Melkor, "No theme may be played that hath not its uttermost source in me, nor can any alter the music in my despite. For he that attempteth this shall prove but mine instrument in the devising of things more wonderful, which he himself hath not imagined." The discord that Melkor had intended as an act of independence had been woven into the greater design without his knowledge or consent. The ugliness he introduced had given rise to new beauty that would not otherwise have existed. The dissonance had not destroyed the symphony, it had deepened it. This was one of the foundational ideas of the entire mythology, that evil could not ultimately escape being made unknowingly to serve the design of Eru Ilúvatar. Not because Eru controlled every individual act, but because his design was vast enough to encompass even rebellion and make something from it. When the music ceased, Eru showed the Ainur the meaning of what they had sung. He showed them a vision. In this vision, they beheld a world, a globe of light and shadow, of seas and mountains, of forests and plains, of living creatures and the great movements of seasons and ages. They watched its history unfold, from the first moment of light to ages they could barely comprehend, and all of it was the consequence of the music they had sung. And as they looked and wondered, this world was globed within the void, and it was sustained therein, but was not of it. But the vision was not yet the world. It was a showing, a revelation of what would be, not the thing itself made real. When the vision faded, many of the Ainur were moved with a longing they had not known before. They desired to enter the world they had seen, to make it real, to work within it, to bring to completion what the music had proposed. Eru, knowing their desire, granted it. He spoke a single word, "Eh." In Quenya, this word meant "let these things be," or simply, "it is." With that word, the world became real, the void was filled, the music became matter, and the vision became creation. This was the physical creation of the universe in Tolkien's mythology. It was not built by craft or shaped by a divine hand reaching into clay. It was sung into possibility by the Ainur, confirmed in the vision, and made real by the spoken will of Eru Ilúvatar. Those Ainur who chose to enter the world, the Valar and Maiar, descended into Eh. There they would spend age upon age, shaping Arda, the earth, preparing it. But they did so knowing that the world they were shaping was not ultimately for them. It was being prepared for those who would come later. To understand Eru Ilúvatar's unique place in the mythology, it is essential to understand the Flame Imperishable, for it defined his authority above every other being in a precise and practical way. The Flame Imperishable is not simply power, or divine energy, or magical force in any generic sense. It is the specific capacity to create genuine, self-willed, independently existing life. It is the difference between making a perfect statue and making a living person. A craftsman could produce a form that resembled a person in every detail, but only the Flame Imperishable could give that form a soul, a genuine will, an inner existence that did not depend on its maker for every thought and movement. The Flame Imperishable resided with Eru, and with Eru alone. This was stated explicitly in the Ainulindalë. No Ainu possessed it, however great their power. The Valar could shape mountains and fill seas and grow forests. They could craft objects of extraordinary beauty, but they could not give genuine independent life to any being from nothing. Without the flame, they could only work with what Eru had already created, or shape what already existed. This was why Melkor's long search for the flame in the void had been futile. It was not a thing he had missed, hiding somewhere in the darkness. It was inseparable from Eru's own being. To possess the Flame Imperishable would have been, in effect, to become Eru, and that was not something any created being could do. The implications of this ran throughout the entire mythology. It explained why the orcs, Melkor's most numerous and terrible servants, were not truly original creations. They were believed, according to lore recorded in the Silmarillion and elaborated extensively in Morgoth's Ring, to have been elves captured and corrupted in the earliest ages of the world. Melkor could debase and distort life. He could twist beauty into horror, but he could not create genuine new life because the flame was not his. As Morgoth's Ring stated, the one alone can make truly new things. The Valar spent enormous stretches of time shaping Arda, preparing it through great labors and great conflicts. But through all that time they understood one thing with certainty: Arda was not being made for them. The world was being prepared for the children of Ilúvatar. The children were of two kinds: the firstborn, who were the elves, and the followers, who were men. Both were created directly by Eru Ilúvatar himself, not by the Valar, not by any collaboration with the Ainur. They were his most personal creations, beings in whom the Flame Imperishable had been placed directly, giving them genuine inner life, genuine free will, and the capacity for choices that were truly and irreducibly their own. The elves were the first to awaken. The Silmarillion recorded that they opened their eyes in starlight beside a lake called Cuiviénen, far in the east of Middle-earth. They were fair in form and immortal by nature. Their souls, called Fear in Quenya, were bound to the world and would endure within it for as long as the world itself lasted. If an elf died in body, the soul persisted and passed to the halls of Mandos, where it might, in time, be re-embodied and returned to the world. Men, the second children, awoke later. The exact location and manner of their awakening was not fully recorded even in the mythology. The Valar themselves did not know it in detail, as men had awakened in a distant and unreached part of the world, while the Valar were occupied with other things. What was known was that men were different from elves in one fundamental way. They were mortal. Their lives were shorter, and at death, their souls departed from the world entirely. The mortality of men was one of the most theologically significant subjects in the entire mythology, and it was entirely and deliberately the design of Eru Ilúvatar. Within the mythology, mortality was frequently perceived by those who experienced it as a burden, even a curse. The elves sometimes pitied men for their short lives. The Numenorians, the greatest of all mortal peoples, eventually came to rage against death and to call it the ban, a prohibition placed upon them by the Valar out of jealousy. This perception, as the mythology was at pains to make clear, was a lie, first seeded by Melkor and later elaborated by Sauron. The truth, as Eru had intended it, was different. Death was not a diminishment of men. It was a gift of a radically different kind, one so profound and so beyond the understanding of any being within the world that even the Valar did not know what awaited men after their departure. Their souls were not bound to Arda the way elvish souls were. When men died, they went somewhere that the music of the Ainur had not encompassed. Somewhere beyond the vision, beyond the circles of the world, known only to Eru himself. Morgoth's Ring contained an extended philosophical dialogue known as the Athrabeth Finrod a Andreth, the debate of Finrod and Andreth, in which these ideas were explored at length. The elvish lord Finrod Felagund discussed with a mortal woman named Andreth the nature of men's mortality and their relationship with Eru. Andreth reflected a common mortal perspective, that death was a darkness, a severance, an unmaking. Finrod offered a counter-argument that men's departure from the world might be a going beyond what the world could contain, a freedom that no elf could experience. The Silmarillion stated in its account of the Valar that Eru had given men a new gift, and that the sons of men die indeed and leave the world, wherefore they are called the guests or the strangers. They were guests in the world, not permanent inhabitants. Their true destination lay elsewhere, in Eru's keeping alone. The mythology consistently presented this as Eru's most personal act of love toward men, the granting of a freedom from the world's history that no other created being could experience. An elf, however long she lived, was part of the world's story until the world ended. A man stepped out of that story at death into something that was Eru's alone to know. Among all the legends most directly involving Eru Ilúvatar, the story of Aule and the Dwarves was perhaps the most illuminating of Eru's character. Not his power, but his mercy. It was recorded in the Silmarillion in the chapter titled, Of Aule and Yavanna. Aule was among the greatest of the Valar, the craftsman and maker of extraordinary skill, whose love of creation was genuine and deep. His nature reflected those aspects of Eru that delighted in making things, in giving form to matter, in the satisfaction of craft well done. But Aule was also impatient. During the long ages in which the Valar labored to prepare Arda for the coming of the children of Ilúvatar, Aule grew restless with waiting. He wanted to create beings who could learn from him, to whom he could teach his knowledge and his craft, who would share his love of the making of things. And in that desire, genuine and good in its origin, even if flawed in its expression, he made a decision that overstepped every limit of his authority. In secret, Aule fashioned 7 beings. He gave them physical forms suited to the hardness of the earth, stout, strong, resilient to heat and cold, and the harshness of the world's early ages. He gave them a language. He gave them the will to endure hardship. He called them the Khazad, who would come to be known to elves as the Nagrim, the stunted people, and to men as the Dwarves. In the underground halls where he worked, he kept them hidden, believing he had done something of great worth. Eru was not deceived. The Silmarillion recorded that when Aule was at work on his creations, Eru spoke to him directly. He said, "Why dost thou attempt a thing which thou knowest is beyond thy power and thy authority? For thou hast from me as a gift thy own being only, and no more. And therefore the creatures of thy hand and mind can live only in thee and through thee, and only as thou dost govern them can they move and do, and there is no other life in them." Eru then demonstrated this. As he spoke, the 7 dwarves moved, but only as Aule directed them. When Aule did not consciously will them to act, they were still. They had form, they had shape, they had a language, but they had no inner fire of their own. They were, in the deepest sense, not living beings. They were extraordinarily crafted constructions, nothing more. Aule's response was not defiance, it was genuine sorrow and humility. He acknowledged that he had overreached, that he had done what was not his to do, and he raised his hammer to destroy what he had made, not in resentment, but in genuine submission to the truth Eru had spoken. It was at precisely that moment, the moment of Aule's sincere humility, that Eru intervened. He stopped Aule. He told him that he had seen the thought in Aule's heart from the very beginning, and that he had seen in it a genuine love of creation, not pride, not rivalry, not a desire to replace or rival Eru. And then in an act of mercy, Eru gave the dwarves the Flame Imperishable. He granted them true life. But there was a condition. The dwarves were to be the adopted children of Eru, genuine and truly alive, but they could not come before the firstborn, the elves, who had been the original children from the beginning of the design. Eru put the 7 fathers of the dwarves to sleep in different places beneath the earth, to await the time after the elves had first awakened under the stars. Only then would the dwarves be permitted to rise. This was how the dwarves came into existence, not as an independent creation, but as adopted children of Eru, genuine life, genuinely free, born from an act of overreach that Eru chose to transform into an act of grace. The story said something about Eru that no recitation of his power alone could convey. He saw the intention behind an act, not merely the act itself. He rewarded sincerity and humility with mercy, and he chose to make even Aule's well-intentioned mistake into a new part of the design. Among all the stories in the Silmarillion, the tale of Beren and Luthien was called by Tolkien himself the most important of the First Age, and it was the story in which Eru Ilúvatar demonstrated, in the most personal way recorded in the mythology, his capacity for mercy toward individual lives. Lúthien was an elvish princess, the daughter of the elven king Thingol and the Maya Melian, and she was counted among the most beautiful beings ever to live in Arda. Beren was a mortal man, brave and determined, but mortal, and therefore separated from Lúthien by the entire gulf that lay between elves and men. Their love was the subject of one of the greatest legends of the First Age. Through extraordinary courage and suffering, Beren and Luthien together achieved what no other being had done. They entered Angband, the fortress of Melkor himself, and retrieved one of the 3 Silmarils, the great jewels of light made by the elvish craftsman Feanor, which Melkor had stolen and set in his iron crown. This deed came at great cost. When Beren finally died from a wound dealt by Melkor's wolf Carcharoth, Lúthien did not simply grieve. The grief was so complete and absolute that life went out of her as well, and her spirit passed to the halls of Mandos. There, in the hall of the Keeper of the Dead, Lúthien sang. The Silmarillion recorded. Her song was the most fair that ever in words was woven, and the song of Lúthien it was most sorrowful that ever the world shall hear. She sang of the love between elf and man, of sorrow, of loss, of beauty that had been cut down from the world. Mandos, who was not easily moved, who held the dead in silence and did not release them lightly, was moved. The Silmarillion recorded that Mandos was moved to pity, who never before was so moved. Mandos brought the matter before Manwë, the chief of the Valar, who in turn brought it before Eru Ilúvatar. The final decision was Eru's. Eru gave Lúthien a choice. She could be restored as an elf, returned to immortal life, to dwell in the blessed realm as she had been before until the world's end, or she could choose to become mortal, to be given a second life in Middle-earth, brief and mortal, in which she would be reunited with Beren, both of them living out a second span of years as mortal beings, until they died together, and their fate passed beyond the knowledge of all the Valar. Lúthien chose mortality. She chose Beren. Beren and Lúthien lived a second life together in a wild and quiet corner of Middle-earth, in a happiness that was all the more precious for being finite. When they finally died, the Silmarillion recorded, "They have passed beyond the circles of the world, and do not return." This was the only time in the recorded mythology that a mortal man and an elvish woman were given such a fate together, departing the world in the same direction, into the mystery that was Eru's alone to know. The union of Beren and Lúthien had consequences that extended far beyond their own lives. Their descendants were of mixed elvish and mortal blood, and this created a question the mythology had never before confronted. What were such beings? Were they bound by the fate of elves, or by the fate of men? Eru resolved this through the Council of the Valar by granting the half-elven a choice of kindred. Each person of sufficient lineage, who was born of the union of elf and man, could choose permanently which people they would belong to, whether to be counted among the elves with immortality and the fate of elvish souls, or among men with mortality and the fate that lay beyond the circles of the world. This choice was given, among others, to Arundel the Mariner and his wife Elwing, both of whom chose to be of elvish kind. Their children, Elrond and Elros, were also given the choice. Elrond chose to be of elvish kind, remaining in the world and playing a significant role through the second and third ages of the mythology. Elros chose to be of men, and became the first king of Numenor, ancestor of the great Numenorian royal line, and ultimately a forefather of Aragorn. This willingness of Eru to grant a choice that altered the fundamental nature of a soul's existence was another expression of the same quality he had shown toward Lúthien, an attentiveness to individual lives, and a readiness to act upon specific situations with a compassion that could not be reduced to general rules. The most dramatic physical intervention of Eru Ilúvatar in the history of the world came near the end of the Second Age, with the downfall of Numenor. It was recorded in the Silmarillion in a section called Akallabeth, the downfall of Numenor. The Numenorians were a people of men who had been granted extraordinary gifts by the Valar as a reward for their faithfulness during the First Age. They were given a great island kingdom called Numenor, also called Andor, the land of gift, raised from the sea for their habitation. They were given lifespans far exceeding those of ordinary men. Their wisdom, their craft, and their skill in seafaring surpassed all other mortal peoples of that age. But the shadow of mortality still fell over them, and as the generations passed, many Numenorians turned their gaze westward toward the Undying Lands, the realm where the Valar dwelt, and where death did not come. They began to see their mortality not as Eru's gift, but as a grievance, a thing withheld from them unjustly. These tensions deepened through the centuries. Eventually, Sauron, the greatest servant of Melkor to survive the First Age, was captured by the Numenorian king Ar-Pharazôn and brought to the island as a prisoner. Within a few short generations, Sauron had accomplished what no army had managed. He had corrupted the king and much of the court from within. He told them that the Valar were tyrants and liars, that they had stolen immortality from men to keep it for themselves, and that Eru, if he existed at all, was either indifferent or to be defied. Ar-Pharazôn, the greatest military conqueror among all the Numenorian kings, assembled a fleet so vast and so numerous that it was said to darken the sea beneath it. He sailed this armada west to the shores of the Undying Lands, a direct act of open rebellion against Eru and the Valar alike, seeking to seize immortality by force. When Ar-Pharazôn set foot on the shores of the Undying Lands, the Valar laid down their governance of the world. They removed themselves from the direct management of history and called upon Eru Ilúvatar to judge what had been done. Eru judged. He opened the sea. Numenor was swallowed entire, its mountains and cities, and its people. Akalabeth recorded that the Numenorians were buried under falling hills. The armada, still in the Undying Lands, was also destroyed, buried under mountains that collapsed upon it. Ar-Pharazôn himself was buried alive under fallen hills, where the mythology suggested he remained imprisoned until the last battle at the end of time. But Eru did not stop there. He changed the shape of the world. Until this moment, Arda had been flat. The Undying Lands had been a physical part of the same world as Middle-earth, reachable in principle by any ship that sailed far enough westward. After the downfall of Numenor, Eru made the world round. The Undying Lands were removed from the physical earth entirely and placed in a separate realm, no longer reachable by any mortal ship sailing any course or direction. The old straight road, the path that once connected the physical world to the shores of the Undying Lands, became a road only the Ainur and those granted special passage could travel. For all others, it ceased to exist as a navigable route. The faithful survivors of Numenor, those who had maintained their reverence for Eru and refused to follow Ar-Pharazôn's rebellion, led by Elendil and his sons Isildur and Anarion, were saved from the waves. They were carried by great winds to the shores of Middle-earth, where they established the kingdoms of Arnor in the north and Gondor in the south. Their line continued through the Third Age and beyond, to Aragorn, whose story lay in the events of the War of the Ring. This act, the swallowing of Numenor and the reshaping of the world's cosmological structure, was the fullest expression of Eru's power over creation. Not just making or sustaining, but reshaping, altering the physical and metaphysical structure of the world in direct response to the choices of its inhabitants. Among the legends associated with Eru Ilúvatar was the account of the Meneltarma, the Pillar of Heaven, a mountain that stood at the very center of the island of Numenor. It was the only place in the entire island that was considered sacred to Eru, and the way it was used told a great deal about how the Numenorians in their faithful period understood the nature of the one they worshipped. No temple was ever built on the Meneltarma's summit. No altar was raised. No image or representation of Eru was made or placed there. It was a bare, open summit under the open sky, and the Numenorians would ascend it 3 times a year for observances dedicated to Eru alone. These gatherings were recorded in unfinished tales. The 3 gatherings had names in Quenya. Eru Kierm, the prayer to Eru, was held in early spring. Eru Laitala, the praise of Eru, was held at midsummer. Eru Hantal, the thanksgiving to Eru, was held at the end of autumn. These were not ceremonies of fear or supplication. They were acts of gratitude and recognition, performed in silence, without sacrifice, without elaborate ritual. The only presence beyond the Numenorians themselves was the eagles of Manwë, great birds of intelligence and power who were understood as messengers between the Valar and the world, who watched from the heights above during these gatherings. It was recorded that even during the years when the Numenorians had grown proud and had begun to resent the limits set on them, the Meneltarma itself was never openly violated. Even those who had turned away from reverence for Eru did not dare to defile that summit directly. It remained, even in the years of the island's decline, a place apart. After the downfall of Numenor, the faithful survivors who came to Middle-earth maintained their acknowledgement of Eru, though they built no formal places of worship. Among the men of Gondor, the custom of standing in silence before eating persisted through the Third Age, a quiet remembrance of the reverence that their Numenorian ancestors had once carried to the top of the Pillar of Heaven. Tolkien's mythology included a prophecy concerning the end of the world, one present in earlier drafts and partially preserved in texts collected in the History of Middle-earth series, though it was never fully integrated into the published Silmarillion. According to these texts, the present age of the world was not final. There would come, at the end of all things, an event called the Dagor-Dagorath, the Last Battle, or the Battle of Battles. At this final conflict, Melkor himself, who had been cast out beyond the circles of the world at the end of the First Age, would return. He would break the door of night and re-enter the world with a power greater than he had ever wielded before. The forces of Arda would gather against him. Some traditions, found in the earliest drafts of the mythology, prophesied that Turin Turambar, one of the most tragic and heroic of all mortal men, whose story was told in the Children of Húrin, would return at the last battle and deal Melkor his final death, striking with his great black sword, Gurthang the blow that would end Melkor's existence for good. After the last battle, the mythology suggested something entirely new would happen. Eru Ilúvatar would speak a new song, a great theme of creation that had never been part of the original music of the Ainur, and that had never been shown to them in the original vision. In this new song, it was suggested that the children of Ilúvatar themselves would take part, not merely as subjects of the design, but as participants in the act of creation that would renew and complete the world. The details of this renewal were deliberately left beyond the horizon of the mythology, consistent with the idea that Eru's ultimate designs were beyond the comprehension of any being within the world. But the direction was clear. The history of Arda was not a closed loop, not a cycle endlessly repeating. It was moving toward a conclusion that Eru had always held in reserve, one that would fulfill and surpass everything that had come before. This was not the mythology's form of despair. It was its deepest form of hope. Having traced the major stories and acts of Eru Ilúvatar as recorded across the mythology, it was possible to define what his powers were, precisely and without exaggeration. The first and most absolute was the Flame Imperishable, the sole capacity to create genuine, self-willed, independently existing life. This was the power that separated Eru from every other being in the mythology. The Ainur could work within creation, only Eru could originate it. The second was comprehensive foreknowledge. Eru knew all themes that could be sung, all futures that could unfold, and all choices that the children and the Ainur could make. When Melkor introduced discord, Eru's response demonstrated that he had already seen it and already prepared for it. No act within the world escaped his knowledge. The third was the power to shape creation itself at the level of its physical and cosmological structure. The downfall of Numenor demonstrated that Eru could alter not merely the events of history but the shape of the world, removing entire realms from the physical plane, changing the geometry of the earth itself. The fourth, and perhaps the most significant in its implications, was the capacity to incorporate the choices of free beings, including the choices of evil, into a design that those beings had not intended. Eru did not prevent Melkor from introducing discord. He did not prevent Aule from overstepping. He permitted the free choices of created beings and ensured, at the level of the larger design, that even those choices served purposes those who made them had not imagined. No being could rival him, challenge him, or take from him anything that was his. But the mythology described what might be understood as chosen constraints, self-imposed limitations that defined how Eru chose to engage with the world he had made. These were not weaknesses. They were expressions of a profound commitment to the genuine freedom of the beings he had created. He chose to give the Ainur genuine freedom, including the freedom to rebel, as Melkor did. He chose to give the children of Ilúvatar genuine free will, including the freedom to turn toward darkness. He chose, in almost all circumstances, not to intervene directly, to act through secondary causes, through the Valar, through the unfolding of the music itself, rather than through direct command. The result was a world that contained genuine suffering and genuine evil, but also genuine courage, genuine love, and genuine beauty, none of which would have been possible in a world where Eru simply overrode every bad choice before it could be made. His restraint, in this sense, was not a limitation of his power. It was the fullest expression of what he had intended in making beings with genuine inner lives, that they should be truly free, truly responsible, and ultimately participants, even when they did not know it, in a story whose author remained, always, the one who stood outside the circles of the world. In the mythology itself, Eru Ilúvatar was recognized as the source of all that was good, true, and beautiful in Arda. The elves acknowledged him as the ultimate authority above even the Valar. The Valar themselves were understood as his servants and vicegerents, not independent powers. Men, in their faithful periods, gave him gratitude and reverence. He was known as the one who had woven meaning into the structure of the world from the very beginning, whose design was so comprehensive that it could accommodate rebellion, overreach, tragedy, and loss, and still move toward completion. He was recognized for the mercy he showed to individual lives, the adoption of the Dwarves from Aule's overreach, the gift given to Lúthien and Beren, the choice granted to the half-elven. These were not the acts of an abstract cosmic force. They were the acts of a being who saw individuals, considered their particular situations, and responded to the sincerity of their hearts. And he was recognized as the final author of the great story, the being in whose design every thread, every joy, every grief, every choice, and every consequence was ultimately held, moving through all the ages of the world and beyond them, toward a conclusion that no being within the world could fully see. And so we come to the end of today's episode. A heartfelt thank you to every subscriber who has chosen to be part of this journey, and a very special thank you to the channel members. Your generosity goes above and beyond. If this episode was valuable to you, please share it with someone who would appreciate it. It genuinely makes a difference to the reach of this channel. And if you have not yet subscribed or followed, I would warmly invite you to do so. It ensures you are here for every episode yet to come. Thank you for spending this time with me today. Until next time.